From the upstairs bedroom of their home in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, Melanie could hear the plaintive cry of her son from his room.
"Hey Mom, the internet's out. Please call someone."
This same complaint was being echoed across the state, in households, offices, in meeting rooms, and in vehicles. Suddenly, there was no internet in Texas, anywhere. But it wasn't just in Texas, it was spreading like a plague across the South, then began creeping north, until there was a nationwide blackout. And everything stopped. Cell phones weren't ringing. Lights weren't coming on. Television and radio stations weren't broadcasting. Traffic in cities from New York to California was paralyzed in gridlock as traffic lights malfunctioned, and traffic came to a grinding halt, even as horns blared, and tempers boiled over, amid threats of violence followed by actual violence. In less than 1 hour the crisis began, revealing the barbarism of a very spoiled populace. The internet was down across the nation. The world would not find out for some time that this was a highly skilled attack on an obscure part of the internet infrastructure called BGP, or Border Gateway Protocol, which determines how traffic is routed. BGP is a so-called path vector protocol. In other words, it looks for the shortest path to a destination. Whoever is displaying, or a term they use called advertising, the shortest BGP route, gets the traffic. By manipulating the advertising, traffic can be rerouted to routers that can be overwhelmed and shut down. But such sophisticated operations, such as BGP, one would think, should be handled by experts. But in this case, BGP is controlled by individuals and network operators, and if those individuals are incompetent, or corrupt, or politically motivated, and part of a larger well-funded operation, it is a recipe for unprecedented disaster. Colt Samuels was just like everybody else in the hotel on that chilly wet Thursday morning on the last day of October. He was frustrated, cold, and desperate to get back to what he now called home. But there was a problem, and that problem had derailed his transport home from one of his least favorite airports in the country, the dirty and decaying LaGuardia Airport in New York. Colt was supposed to have a car pick him up at the hotel at precisely 7:15 a.m. But the car actually arrived at 8:03. And while it may seem odd that anyone would know the exact time of a late arriving car, Colt was in the detail business. He was a top-tier intel analyst for the NSA, one of the most secretive agencies in the world. But all that and a buck will get you a cup of coffee at a cheap restaurant, because in this world, at this time, he was just like everyone else, stranded, cut off, and trying to figure out what happened. His first thought was rent a vehicle and drive to the DC area. It wasn't that far and he could make it home in about 5 hours. But with every computer network in the city down, there was no way to rent transport. Of course, he could pay the driver of the car that came to pick him up to take him to his home in Alexandria, Virginia. He had a map and directions, but the problem was fuel. With no internet, there was no power. With no power, no working pumps at the gas stations, which meant no fuel, which ultimately meant no ride home. And to top it all off, it was unseasonably cold for this time of year in New York. The temperature last night had dipped to 34 degrees, and the forecast called for rain and drizzle for the next 3 days. Colt knew if he were back home, at his real home, on a ranch north of Buffalo, Wyoming, in the shadow of the Big Horn mountain range, he'd simply saddle a horse, and he was as mobile as he needed to be. Out there, this would be an inconvenience, but here in New York City it was crippling. But soon it could be more than crippling, it could be a horror show. If this dragged on, people would become desperate. Desperation would be followed by fear and fear and panic soon morph into violence. And the strong would coalesce into roving bands of violent psychopaths. And that's when civilization breaks down, and every post-apocalyptic movie you've ever seen becomes reality. But he refused to let his mind go any further down that road, at least for now. Believing that this would be a quick trip, Colt packed light, probably too light. To save taking an extra bag, he packed only the essentials for this one-day, one-night trip, which meant he did not pack his cell phone, which would have worked with or without cell towers. But 2020 hindsight would do him no good now. His fellow captives at the hotel could be heard reassuring themselves that surely the government was working on this and that everything would be back on in no time. But Colt knew firsthand how petty, lumbering, disjointed and ferociously jealous each of the departments, and departments within the departments were, and that cooperation, even in an emergency, was elusive at best. Life within government is tribal, and tribes don't willingly subvert their influence, or give up their turf easily. It was more important to protect your turf than to solve the problem. That of course meant that it would last at least a few days until someone with enough gravitas could sort out a pecking order that could satisfy the egocentric bureaucrats that ran the loony bin inside government, and that assumed that somebody in fact really wanted the problem solved. On day 3 of the outage there were flashes of hope. Both the internet and power would come on for short periods of time before evaporating once again into the ether. And during one of the short intervals of digital life, Colt was able to get a message out to his office, instructing them to send a car and a plane. Sunday, at 9:47 p.m., Colt touched down at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland, where a car met him but did not take him home. Instead he was delivered to a nearly windowless facility just outside of Silver Springs, Maryland. The driver told him his family would be notified that he was safe, and working on the problem. They had already been moved to a protected facility, and were secure and well cared for. He would be given contact information at the facility. With that, Colt entered the building, passed through security, and entered what could only be described as a war room, with top military brass, analysts, bureau chiefs, a myriad of functionaries, computer geeks and technicians, trying to knit together a team of sleuths to identify a complex problem. Colt was desperate to see his family, but he knew that that was not going to happen until they restored some semblance of sanity to this situation. But he was able to share 5 minutes on the phone with his wife Donna, who did her best to disguise her fear and confusion, before he had to meet with his team. Colt's team, for the most part, operated below the radar. That was by design, to prevent power-hungry department heads from cannibalizing what was perhaps one of the most effective teams in the NSA. Within hours after Colt's return, a picture began to form and patterns were beginning to be revealed. Within 24 hours the team had identified the root of the problem, and within 48 hours they were well on their way to a solution. But Colt had that feeling he only gets when he knows in his gut that this is only the beginning. The real emergency was yet to be revealed. And once again his gut was right. Using the chaos as cover, the president, working with the Democrats in the Senate and the Democrats and a few rhinos in the House, had managed to postpone the elections indefinitely. That ended what was undoubtedly going to be a political bloodbath for the left in this country. It also gave them an excuse to use emergency powers to limit dissent and bring about sweeping emergency changes to the nation. When the lights came back on in America, a new darkness was revealed. Government claimed that banking records had been destroyed or damaged, so many companies were without funds to operate, and mysteriously, every conservative organization in the country had been deplatformed and their funds had disappeared. Their major donors were debanked. Communications were limited to a few hours a day, at random times. Radio and television stations were now being programmed by government agencies. The Republic was dead. Welcome to Gulag, America. Government assurances came hourly, promising that this was only temporary, and that life would soon return to normal. That was the message to the gullible, and pablum for fools. The left learned a long time ago that you never let a good crisis go to waste, especially if you created the crisis. What remained of America was only the memory of freedom. They controlled the buying and selling. If you or your organization weren't on their approved list, you didn't have a bank account or payment platform, which meant no funding. And since the government controlled banks and banking under their emergency powers, one didn't dare speak out. Doing so would cost you your bank account, which meant you couldn't make house payments, car payments, pay your electric bill, receive medical treatment or medicine, or even buy food. As this crisis played out, America would find that in total, $9 trillion had disappeared from the bank accounts of businesses and citizens. It was the greatest theft in the history of humanity. The world's economy had plummeted into a worldwide depression. As services like sanitation, water, and utilities broke down across the planet, disease, sickness, and plagues raged, and madness was the order of the day. But in truth, we had lost much more than $9 trillion. We had lost the nation, because we had no means of fighting back. No way to go around their financial system. There was no way to implement our own communications. We had the time to develop rails outside of their system, but foolishly we built alternative systems that still rode on their rails. And that would be our undoing, and the undoing of 250 years of America, and would leave conservatives and Christians at the mercy of the left, and they had no mercy. And the darkness fell, and subsumed the light of freedom, and it began to settle in for all of America, and the planet, that life as we knew it was over. And now, there were no more options, and it was far too late to think about, if only we had, because we didn't. This was now a prison planet.